I'll show you how to validate data in an entry widget in Tkinter. In the example project, we will set a limit of 5 characters maximum that can be entered in our entry widget. If our user tries to type in more than 5 characters, the entry widget won't show any additional characters. Join me as we start to look at data validation in Tkinter.
Hi, my name is Jobin, and I'm an open source developer. My channel is called JobinPy, and it's all about Python and Linux. Welcome to JobinPy.
So in this video, I'm going to show you how to validate data that's been put into an entry widget. Here's an example. I have a simple window with a single widget in it. This is a ttk entry widget. And this ttk entry widget only allows a maximum of 5 characters. So if I put in 5 characters, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it lets me. But if I try to put a 6th character, nothing's happening. I'm tapping on the keyboard, but it won't allow me to type anymore. So let's get started with the code. I'll show you how to do this. So I have some starter code here, just some standard stuff. Import tkinter as tk. From tkinter import ttk. Here I'm creating the main window and I'm setting the size of the window to 400 by 200 pixels. And I'm starting the main loop, and our main code's going to go here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new class. So I'm going to call it entry with limit, and it's going to derive from ttk.entry. So this will be like a custom version of a ttk entry widget. And here we're going to create the init constructor, and we'll ask for the parent or the master and optional keyword arguments, if any. And here we're going to initialize our ttk entry widget, and we're going to pass in master and any optional keyword arguments. So what do we have here so far? It's a fairly standard class. It's deriving from a ttk entry widget. So we're creating our own entry widget by deriving from ttk.entry. So this means entry with limit is exactly the same currently as a ttk entry widget. And we're running the init method in the ttk entry widget. So this ttk entry widget is the superclass. It's the class that we're deriving from. So we run super to wake up the ttk entry widget anyway. So we're calling the init constructor on ttk.entry. We're passing in master and the optional keyword arguments. So here we're taking in master and we're taking in optional keywords. And on this line, we're sending that information that we got to the ttk entry widget, the superclass. Okay, so right now as it is, it's exactly the same as a ttk entry widget. Okay, so let's use this in our code. So we'll write in entry username equal entry with limit, and we're going to put this into root, and that's all we're going to pass, and then we're going to pack it onto the screen. And I'm going to pass in expand equal true because this will cause the entry widget to be centered on the window. Okay, so I'm just going to run this to see what we get. Okay, so we have a standard ttk entry widget, and so far it acts exactly the same as a normal ttk entry widget. Okay, so to add some validation to prevent certain data from being entered in, we have to do the following. I'm going to accept a max length parameter, and we're only going to accept it on this line, but we're not going to use it on this line here. The reason is we're asking for max length for our own entry widget called entry with limit. So this widget, the ttk.entry widget, doesn't know what to do with max length because this is part of our own class. So there's no need to pass it into the init constructor for ttk.entry using the super command. So here I'm going to put in self.maxLength equal max length, like that. Okay, so the next thing we need is a method. We're going to call it isValidInput. And we're going to pass in a text variable. And this method has to return true or false. So if the input is okay, then we return true. And if it's not okay, if there's something wrong with the input in the entry widget, then we have to return false. So here I'm going to put if self.maxLength. So in other words, if we have a value for max length, then if the length of the text is greater than self.maxLength, then return false. Otherwise, here we're just going to return true. So if it returns false, it's never going to make it to this line. So this method is pretty much done. Then going back to our init method, the constructor here, I'm going to put in text checker equal root.register. Root is this, root equal tk.tk, so root.register. And it doesn't actually have to be root. I'll explain this in a little bit. So text checker equal root.register, and we need to pass in the method that we want to use to validate the data in the entry widget. So this is what we created here, this method. It's going to return true or false. So we're going to pass in self.isValidInput. And we're not going to run it. So make sure you don't have those parentheses at the end here. So it has to be like that. Okay, so far so good. Then we're going to put in self.configure. And what is self? Self is in reference to our entry widget, our own custom entry widget. So entry with limit. That's the name of our entry widget class. So here we're going to put in self.configure validate equal key validate command equal, and then we have to pass in a tuple here, text underscore checker. So I'm passing in this. This is the one that we use. This is the returned value of this. So text checker, we pass in text checker. It wants to know which command to use to validate the data. So it's going to be text checker. And what we want to pass in to here will be a string of %, capital P. And I'll explain what this is, because this part can seem a little cryptic, but I'll actually explain it. So there's one more thing that we need to do. So the part here where we're actually creating the entry widget, we need to pass in max length and then any number we want. So as an example, I'm just going to put max length equal 5. In other words, our entry widget shouldn't allow more than 5 characters to be typed into the entry widget. Okay, so let's just run this to make sure it works. So I'm going to put in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yep, so it won't allow me to put 6. And if I try to put in letters, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yep, it won't go any further. So it's definitely working. So let's check the code in a little bit more detail. So we know what this is doing. It's just checking the maximum length, and if it's greater than the max length, it's going to return false. Otherwise, it's going to return true. This part is fairly self-explanatory. This line, however, it requires a bit of an explanation. So what is self.configure? Validate equal key. Well, we already talked about self. Self is in reference to our entry widget with our own custom name, so our own custom widget. entry with limit. So what is key? So key basically means we want to validate whenever the keyboard key presses change. So whenever something is being typed or if something is being deleted, that's when we want to verify. So in other words, when we try to modify the text, that's when we want to validate and call this. And eventually this will get called. Some of the other options are the following. I'm just going to drag over the web browser here so you can see it. So this is actually from the website tcl.tk. So it's the actual documentation for the TK graphical user interface toolkit. And we can see here a validation of key. This is the one that we're using. Here it says this will be called. Validate command will be called when the entry is edited. So, and I'm going to put a link to this address in the description so you can see it as well. So some of the other options are focus, focus in, focus out. We already know about key and all. So for example, focus in, it says validate command will be called when the entry receives focus. So if you want to check the value of the entry widget when the entry widget first gets focus, then you would use focus in. Similarly, there's focus out. So these are all the different options you can choose from, and obviously there's none. This is the default, which means there will be no validation. Okay, so going back to our code, we can see that we want to validate whenever the entry widget gets modified. Okay, so that's the explanation for the highlighted code here. The next part says validate command equal, and we're passing in a tuple. So here we're passing in the command that we want to run whenever the entry widget wants to validate. So text checker is the name of the command, and it was created by root.register. And I'll actually come back to this in a little bit. So validate command equal text checker, that's what it's going to use to see if the data is okay or not. But we're also passing in %p to this command, which eventually gets passed into this text argument here. So what is %p? So %p, if we go back to the documentation page, it's actually this one. So capital P. I'm just going to zoom in on this so you can see it better. Okay, so it says here the value of the entry if the edit is allowed. So that basically means if we allow the edit to occur, then this is going to contain the value of the new text. And I'll show you this in action. In this method, I'm going to print text. And this text argument is coming from $p. So this will get passed into text, and here we're going to print text. So text is essentially what %p represents. And I'll show you what it outputs. Okay, so if we look at the console down here, I'm just going to type the letter A, and we see A. If I put the letter B, we see AB. So %p basically shows what the text will end up like overall in the entry widget if we allow it. So if we try to put in 6 characters, it shouldn't allow it, right? So let's try it. So I'm going to put in 1, 2, 3, and we can see it's showing it down here. 4, 5, 6. So you can see that it didn't show 6 in the entry widget. It didn't actually allow the number 6 to even show up in the entry widget, but it did get passed into this function is valid input. So it went through the logic here, and we saw that if we have a 6th character, it's going to end up becoming too long, and that's when we return false, and it never makes it into the entry widget. But we do see what it's going to look like eventually if we do allow it. So that's what %p does. And some of the other ones are also very interesting. So %s will be the current value of entry prior to editing, if you're interested in that. And this one is actually useful too. So percentage and capital S, this says the text string being inserted or deleted, if any. So let's try this one. So percentage and capital S. So I don't have to delete %p. I can add more codes. So here I'm going to put in comma and percentage capital S. But now in this method, I need to create another parameter. And I can call it pretty much anything I like. Here I'm going to name it text inserted or deleted. And instead of printing text, I'm going to print this. So print text inserted or deleted. Okay, so now we have two parameters because here we have two parameters here as well. Okay, so I'm just going to run this and see what we get. So I'm just going to put in A, B, C. So you can see in the entry widget we have ABC, but it's only showing what we've actually added last. So here's a question. What if I try to copy and paste text from the clipboard? What's going to happen? Will this work the way that we're expecting? Well, let's find out. I'm just going to drag in a text editor. And here, I'm just going to type in the word hello. Okay, so I'm going to copy this. And here, I'm going to highlight the text and press Control V on the keyboard. And let's see what we get. Yep, so it did let me. What if I try to paste something that's longer than 5 characters long? So I'm going to put in, hello, this is a test. Copy, and let's try to paste that. It doesn't let me paste it. But we can see that %s showed me what I wanted to input. So I tried to input this, but obviously it was longer than 5 characters, so it returned false. So this works even if you try to copy and paste from the clipboard. And there are some other neat things that you can do as well. Let's say, for example, if you didn't want to allow numbers in the beginning of the entry widget, how would you do that? Well, first thing I would do is at the top, I would say from string import digits. And all this is, I'll show you what digits contains. If I go to it, it basically contains a string and it has numbers in it from 0 to 9. So from string import digits. Then I'm going to put here in our validation method if text starts with, and I'm going to convert this into a tuple, digits, then return false. So here I'm saying that if the eventual text, if we allow the text to be inserted, if the overall entry widget will start with a number, then we want to return false. Let's see if it works. Okay, so I'm going to put the number 1 here. It won't let me type it. And let me put in the word test. Let me try to put a 1 in the beginning. It won't work, which is good. Let me put a 1 after the T. Yep, it lets me do it there. Let me try to put it at the end. It works there as well. Okay, and finally, we also have this line here. It says text checker equal root.register. And this is part of Tkinter. Here you pass a method that you've created. So root.register, and then we're passing in this method that we created. One thing to keep in mind is you don't have to run the register method on root. You can actually run it on pretty much anything in Tkinter, like any widget. And here I'm just going to show you something. So I'm just going to create a button here, just as a demonstration. So btn underscore OK, I'm just going to call it an OK button. So btn underscore OK equal ttk.button. And I'm going to put it into root. I'm just going to set the text to OK. Then I'm just going to pack this onto the screen. I'm going to pack the button onto the screen. And there's the button, so it's just at the top there. It doesn't do anything. But what I want to do is, instead of root.register, I'm going to change it to btn underscore OK.register. And I'm going to run my program again. I just want to see if it still works. Okay, so I'm just going to try to type in more than 5 characters. So A, B, C, D, E, F. Yep, so now it's working as expected. So it actually still works. Even though we're running btn underscore OK.register, it still does the same thing. So the point of me showing this is that it doesn't have to be root.register. It could be button.register, or whichever ttk or tk widget that you might have. So you can probably imagine all the possible things that you can do with data validation with a ttk entry widget. You could even take this further. Like, for example, you can check to see if a given text is a proper format for an email address. And for that, you probably want to use something more advanced, such as regex, which would do more complex string checking. But you would still use something like data validation with an entry widget to accomplish that.
We saw how data validation works using an entry widget in Tkinter. Validating data is useful in all sorts of situations, and Tkinter gives us the methods we need to accomplish this. Until the next tutorial, thanks for watching.